Okay, so our sermon text is from Acts chapter 2, verses 1 through 21. Very familiar story and appropriate for today. Hear the word of the Lord. When the day of Pentecost had come, they were all together in one place. And suddenly from heaven there came a sound like the rush of violent wind, and it filled the entire house where they were sitting. Divided tongues as of fire appeared among them, and a tongue rested on each of them. All of them were filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other languages as the Spirit gave them ability. And now there were devout Jews from every people under heaven living in Jerusalem. And at this sound, the crowd gathered and was bewildered because each one heard them speaking in a native language of each. Amazed and astonished, they asked, "Are these not all speaking Galileans? And how is it that we hear, each of us, in our own native language? Parthians, Medes, Elamites, and residents of Mesopotamia, Judea, Cappadocia, Pontus, Asia, Phrygia, Pamphylia, Egypt, and parts of Libya belonging to Cyrene, and visitors from Rome, both Jews and proselytes, Cretans and Arabs. In our own language, we hear them speaking about God's deeds of power. All were amazed and perplexed, saying to each other, 'What does this mean?' But others sneered and said, 'They are filled with new wine.' Then Peter addresses the crowd. Peter, standing with the 11, raised his voice and addressed them. 'Men of Judea and all who live in Jerusalem, let this be known to you, and listen to what I say. Indeed, these are not drunk, as you suppose, for it is only 9 o'clock in the morning. No, this is what was spoken through the prophet Joel. In the last days, it will be, God declares, that I will pour out my spirit upon all flesh, and your sons and daughters shall prophesy, and your young men shall see visions, and your old men shall dream dreams. Even upon my slaves, both men and women, and in those days I will pour out my spirit, and they shall prophesy. And I will show portents in the heavens above, and signs on the earth below, blood and fire, smoky mist. The sun shall be turned to darkness, the moon to blood, before the coming of the Lord's great and glorious day. Then everyone who calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved." The word of the Lord. Have you ever considered what a gift memory is? God gave us brains so that we could store information. In other words, have the ability to learn and to consequently grow. Even plants have a form of memory, responding to stimuli and adapting for survival. Without memory, nothing could exist. God's wisdom, expressed in Proverbs 3, verses 1 to 2, says, "My son, do not forget my teaching, but keep my commandments in your heart, for they will prolong your life many years and bring you peace and prosperity." What I want to explore today is how God's gift of memory serves a specific purpose to remind us of the past so we can recognize and learn from the wrong and celebrate the good. Tomorrow, we commemorate Memorial Day. Memorial Day originally was called Decoration Day, and it was established after the Civil War to honor fallen soldiers by decorating their graves with flowers, wreaths, and flags. According to battlefields.org, the Civil War was America's bloodiest conflict. 620,000 people died in the line of duty, about 2% of the American population at the time, equivalent to about 6 million people today. The establishment of the tradition of decorating graves of soldiers began locally. One such incident, noted by va.org, included newly freed and enslaved African Americans in Charleston, South Carolina, grateful for the ultimate sacrifice for their freedom, exhumed bodies of Union soldiers from a mass Confederate grave at a racetrack and gave them proper individual burials in a dedicated cemetery, decorating their graves with flowers. A second commemoration was a group of women in Columbus, Mississippi, while decorating the graves of Confederate soldiers, noticed the neglect of the nearby graves of Union soldiers who were considered the enemy. Disturbed at the sight of the bare graves, the women decorated the graves of the Union soldiers as well, showing small signs of the beginning of a national reconciliation. Over time, the country decided to nationalize Memorial Day as a yearly holiday on the last Monday of May to remember specifically all those who sacrificed their lives in war by decorating their graves with flags and flowers. So in our history, in the late 1700s, citizens of 13 colonies of the United States of America had banded together and paid a very high price to unify into one independent nation, to be freed from the tyranny of King George III. And not even a century later, this young nation was nearly torn in two over the issue of slavery. Our nation has since participated in many wars, fought in foreign lands, but for the same cause, freedom. Freedom from want, freedom from danger, freedom to pursue life, liberty, and happiness, but with a cost. We ask ourselves, when will these wars end? When will the last war cease? In the meanwhile, Memorial Day accumulates the memory of fatalities of each war fought. We ask ourselves, what do we lack that would finally and permanently unify the human race, rather than focus on what divides us, threatens us? It seems like remembering on days like Memorial Day, while important, is not enough. The answer is in Pentecost. God in the Old Testament also set up days of remembrance. There are 3 high holy days where pilgrimage to the temple in Jerusalem was strongly encouraged, and they were the Passover, the Pentecost, and the Festival of Tents or Tabernacles. The first, Passover, originally marked the beginning of spring and the planting of the fields. It was also the time to remember the Israelites freed from slavery by the sacrifice of the lambs whose blood on the doorpost protected each Jewish household from the Passover of death of the firstborn. The second, Pentecost, late spring, 50 days after the Passover feast, marked the beginning of the harvest and the first fruits of the field. It was also a time to remember God's giving the covenant and the law to his people freed from Egypt while meeting God at Mount Sinai 50 days after the Exodus from Egypt. And the third festival occurred in autumn, the Feast of the Tabernacles, when the whole harvest is brought in, remembering God's preservation of his people living in tents in the wilderness, worshiping God in his own tent, the tabernacle, before entering the promised land. In the year that Jesus was crucified, during the Passover feast, Jews and those who converted to Judaism from all over Roman and Middle East regions came to worship, to observe the second pilgrimage, to bring grain offerings to the temple in Jerusalem. Knowing the economy of writing back in the day, we have to note that Luke took the time and space to list all regions from whence they came. More about that later. If you look at a map that illustrates this, you see concentric circles with the temple in Jerusalem in the center, rippling out like water to the ends of southern Europe, northern Africa, and the Middle East, covering about 1.5 million square miles, pretty much all of what was known as civilization at that time. And it was said that the small half square mile of Jerusalem city swelled from 30,000 to well over 100,000 people during this festival. So we have a huge crowd milling about in the city, and we have Jesus' disciples together in a house near the courtyard with all the rush of wind that no one could ignore and the tongues of fire appearing above the heads of the disciples. They may have been reminded of the fire and smoke that spewed out of Mount Sinai when the Israelites first encountered God. But what was different this time? It was not Moses speaking for God to just the Israelites, but the speech in everyone's native language to all nations present. Common communication had not happened since the days before the fall of the Tower of Babel. How was this possible? By the presence and power of the Holy Spirit. This is the same Spirit who would come, predicted by Jesus in our Gospel of John reading today. Perplexed and amazed, they all wanted to know what was happening. Some dismissed it, but many others were still puzzling over it, which set them up to receive a reminder of one of God's prophets, Joel, quoted by Peter. Indeed, God did pour out his Spirit on all flesh present at the feast. Indeed, strong wind and tongues of fire appeared. Indeed, Peter did prophesy. But many other things predicted to have yet to come did not happen. The great and terrible day of the Lord has yet to come. Good news. We still have time for the Holy Spirit to act in our lives and the lives of others. Time for the people of God to call on the name of the Lord to be saved. In Christianity, Pentecost commemorates the descent of the Holy Spirit, the marking of the birth of the church, the first fruits of which were those attending the festival of the first fruits. And what of the nationalities all listed? Those divided by their geographic and ethnic background and languages as well were united in this blessing from the Holy Spirit. And what do you think happened when they all returned home? The evidence is in our church today. They shared the good news with others, and so too they would be united by the Holy Spirit and generations to follow. War brings division, disease, and death. It is a manifestation of sin. The Civil War was meant to bring an end to slavery, but instead, many lives were lost, and slavery really did not end. It just went underground. The common language of the Spirit, however, brings reconciliation and peace with God and with each other. It brings a life in liberty, freedom from slavery to sin. It brings obedience to God's law, a manifestation of that freedom from sin. The Tower of Babel represented a common language of the people, but also common wickedness in their arrogance against God. Consequently, God scattered them by language differences and geography because they could no longer understand each other. Then followed mistrust, competition for power, wealth, and resources, which the human race suffers even today. By remembering the past, we see the error of our ways, but do we actually change? Only by the faithfulness of God. By remembering the gift of the Holy Spirit on this day of Pentecost, we are empowered to proceed with hope and peace for all in the future. God unites in the common language of the Holy Spirit, bringing power and righteousness. We look forward to the day the whole harvest of the church is brought in. And in the meanwhile, Holy Spirit, have your way with us. Amen.